I want to start with a mental image. I want you to imagine a machine,
Okay.
but not, a machine made of gears or silicon or circuits. Imagine a machine made of earth, water, blood, and just these highly specific social roles.
A biopolitical machine.
Yeah.
That is a very intense way to open, but honestly, it's accurate.
And this machine has a single overriding purpose: survival.
Yeah.
It's designed to process hundreds of millions of human beings, organize them, feed them, and keep them from destroying each other in a landscape that is, quite frankly, constantly trying to kill them.
Right. And when that machine works, it sustains the largest contiguous population in human history. But when it breaks, the results are catastrophic on a scale that is hard for the modern mind to even comprehend.
We are talking about the operating system of Chinese civilization. Now, usually when we learn about China in the West, or even just watch movies set in its history, what do we get?
You get the spectacle. Always the spectacle. You get the Forbidden City, the flowing robes, the tea ceremonies. You get a list of dynasties that goes on for pages. Tang, Song, Ming, Qing.
Memorize the dates, pass the test.
Exactly.
And it's what I call the names and dates trap. It treats Chinese history like it's a museum exhibit. You look at the pretty vase, you look at the scary emperor, and then you move on. But that doesn't tell you how the society functioned.
It doesn't tell you the why. Why were the rules so rigid? Why was the pressure on the individual so crushing?
That's what we are doing today. We are ignoring the spectacle for a bit to look at the source code. We want to understand the invisible rules, the social physics, if you will, that have held this massive civilization together for 4,000 years.
And to do that, we have to talk about things that usually get glossed over. We have to talk about mud. We have to talk about the terrifying logic of the group. We have to talk about how these ancient political structures eventually work their way down into the most private, intimate parts of human life.
Even down to gender, even down to how a father talks to his son or how a husband relates to his wife.
Especially that. Because in this operating system, acting like a father or acting like a woman isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a structural component of the machine. If you break character, you don't just embarrass yourself.
You do what?
You threaten the stability of the universe.
Okay, that is a huge claim, threatening the universe just by, acting out of turn?
It sounds hyperbolic to us today, I know. But by the end of this hour, I think you'll see why. For the people living inside this system, it was the absolute, literal truth.
All right, before we jump into the mud, and it sounds like we mean that literally, we need to set the terms. The sources make a really big point about defining what we even mean by Chinese civilization. Because it's not just a country on a map, is it?
No, not at all. And this is distinction number one. If you look at a map of modern China, that's a nation state. But Chinese civilization is. It's a historical process. Think of it less like a building that's been standing for 4,000 years and more like a blueprint that gets used to rebuild the house every single time it burns down.
And it burned down a lot.
Constantly. Invasion, famine, civil war, peasant rebellions. I mean, there are periods of total fragmentation where China effectively ceased to exist as a single political entity.
So what's the continuity then?
The continuity, the thing that makes it China, is that every time the dust settled, the survivors picked up the same blueprint. They used the same cultural memory, the same texts, the same ideas to reconstruct the system, and usually they made it stronger and more complex than it was before.
So continuity isn't the absence of change. Continuity is the refusal to stay broken.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a process of repeated reconstruction. And there's a second distinction we need to make early on. We need to get rid of the idea that this civilization was homogenous.
Meaning everyone was the same, thinking the same things, living the same way.
Right. There's a massive gap, a chasm, really, between the elite culture in the cities and the village life of the peasantry. The sources call this the great tradition versus the little tradition.
Okay, break that down.
The elite, the great tradition, are writing poetry, painting these incredible landscapes and discussing philosophy. They're the ones writing the histories. The peasants, the little tradition are. Well, they're trying to survive the next flood. They're dealing with local gods and ghosts. But they are bound together by this overarching operating system.
And the third distinction you mentioned?
Identity. In the West, especially now, we tend to think of identity as something you're born with, or something you discover deep inside yourself.
Your authentic self.
Exactly. In this system, identity is a historical formation. The source calls it a political grammar of belonging. You aren't just born Chinese in the cultural sense. You perform it. You participate in the rituals. You adopt the text. You fit into the hierarchy.
Perform it. Hold on to that word because I have a feeling that concept of performance is going to be central when we talk about social roles later on.
It's the key to the whole thing.
Okay, let's go to the bedrock then, the foundation of the whole system. Why is this system so obsessed with order? Why is it so terrified of chaos?
To answer that, you have to look at the ground beneath their feet. Which brings us to section 1, the ecological crucible.
We're talking about geography.
We are, specifically, the two great river basins, the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze in the south. But to understand the source code of the state, we really have to focus on the Yellow River.
I've heard it called China's sorrow, which is quite the nickname for a body of water.
It's earned that name 1,000 times over. The Yellow River isn't like the Thames or the Mississippi. It flows through the Loess Plateau.
Loess, that's L-O-E-S-S. This is that fine, windblown soil.
It's basically dust. It's incredibly fine yellow, and it's highly erodible. So when the river cuts through this plateau, it picks up a staggering amount of silt. I mean, in some seasons, the water is something like 60% solid matter. It's essentially flowing mud.
Okay, so you have a muddy river. Why does that lead to a dictatorship? That feels like a leap.
It's not a leap, it's a straight line. Here's why. That mud has to go somewhere. When the river hits the flatlands of the North China Plain, the water slows down. And as it slows, that silt drops out of the water and settles on the riverbed.
So the bottom of the river gets higher.
Right, year after year. And to keep the water from spilling out onto the fields, the farmers build levees dikes along the banks. But the silt keeps settling, so the riverbed keeps rising. So they have to build the dikes higher.
I see where this is going. It's a feedback loop.
It's a terrible feedback loop. Eventually, you end up with a situation where the river is physically flowing above the level of the surrounding countryside. It's a suspended river, held in place only by man-made walls of dirt.
That sounds like a ticking time bomb.
It is a hydrological weapon of mass destruction. If a dike breaks during flood season, gravity takes over. The river doesn't just overflow its banks, it crashes down. We're talking about an inland sea forming almost instantly. It wipes out millions of acres. It drowns entire cities. It causes famines that last for years and kill millions.
So if I'm a farmer in, say, 1000 BC, living in this basin, my life depends entirely on those dikes holding, my family's life, my village's life.
And here is the hydraulic imperative, as it's called. You cannot maintain 1,000 miles of massive earthen levees with just your family. You can't do it with just your village. You need to coordinate labor on a massive, massive scale. You need hundreds of thousands of men moving millions of tons of earth, all working to a synchronized plan.
And you can't organize 100,000 people with a suggestion box.
Exactly. You need a central authority. You need a power structure that can look at a whole region and say, you, and stop farming and start digging. I don't care if you're tired. I don't care about your harvest right now. Dig.
Because if they don't dig, everyone dies.
This is the crucial insight. In this environment, autonomy is a death sentence. In the West, particularly in, say, maritime cultures like ancient Greece or upland cultures like Switzerland, you have this ideal of the rugged individualist, the guy who stands apart.
Right, the hero who defies the king, Achilles sulking in his tent.
In the Yellow River Corps, the rugged individualist is the guy who refuses to fix the dike. He's not a hero, he's a saboteur. If he exercises his freedom to stay home and tend his own plot, the whole village, maybe the whole prefecture, washes away. So the environment itself creates this deep, powerful cultural preference for order over liberty.
That reframes the whole authoritarian streak that we see throughout Chinese history, doesn't it? It's not just about power-hungry warlords. It's a geological necessity.
It's survival technology. And this same logic extends to the food supply. We mentioned the two rivers. The north grew wheat and millet, which are tough crops. The south, along the Yangtze, grew rice.
Which is even more labor-intensive, right?
Massively so. Yeah. It requires these incredibly complex irrigation networks, terracing hillsides, flooding the paddies at the exact right time, transplanting seedlings by hand.
Yeah.
Again, this requires community management on an intense level. You simply cannot be a solitary rice farmer in that ecosystem.
So you have this hydraulic core, a society that learns deep in its bones that coordination is life and chaos is death. But then you have to move the food around.
Right, infrastructure.
Yeah.
This is the other arm of the state. The sources talk at length about the Grand Canal.
Which is artificial, right? They didn't find that river, they dug it.
They dug a waterway the length of a small continent. I mean, for centuries. Why? Because the political capital, the military center, was usually in the north. for defense reasons we'll get to in a second. But the breadbasket, the rice surplus, was in the south. You have to move the grain to the capital and the soldiers.
So the state isn't just a policeman. The state is a logistics company.
It's an extraction and distribution machine. The emperor's power wasn't just measured in armies. It was measured in his ability to move grain and salt. If the grain stops moving, the garrisons on the frontiers starve, the nomads break through, and it's game over for the dynasty.
Speaking of the nomads, we can't talk about the geography without talking about the wall.
The frontier pressure. This is the other half of the pressure cooker. To the north and west of that agricultural core, you have the steppe, the grasslands.
Where farming is impossible.
Or at least very, very difficult. You can't grow crops at scale, so you heard animals, sheep, goats, horses. This created a completely different type of society. They were mobile, they're highly militarized, and they were based on cavalry.
The nomadic confederations, the Xiongnu, the Mongols.
Exactly. And for 2,000 years, they are looking down at the rich, sedentary agricultural cities of the south as a bank vault, just waiting to be cracked.
So the Chinese state is constantly facing an existential threat from the north. It's not a one-off war, it's a permanent condition.
It's a permanent security crisis. This means you need a massive standing army. You need the Great Wall, which is an unbelievable expenditure of labor and resources. You need garrisons all along the frontier.
Right.
All of that costs an absolute fortune.
Which brings us back to the peasant farmer.
The peasant pays for it all. The state has to become this incredibly efficient extraction machine through taxes and grain and forced labor to fund the security that, in theory, keeps that same peasant alive. It's a closed loop. The internal population growth presses on the land, and the external enemies press on the borders.
That's a high-pressure environment.
It's a pressure cooker. And inside a pressure cooker, you can't afford internal squabbling. You can't afford dissent. You need everyone to stay in their lane, do their job, and follow the rules. But here's the problem. You can't rule 100 million people using just whips and chains. It's too expensive. You just don't have enough police.
You need them to police themselves.
You need a software update. You need to move from I obey because you'll hit me to I obey because it is the moral structure of the universe.
And that transitions us perfectly to the software itself, the rituals. This is section 2, the architecture of hierarchy.
Right. And for this, we have to go way back. We have to go back to the Bronze Age, the Shang and the Zhou dynasties.
When we say Bronze Age, I think people picture, guys with bronze swords. But the sources emphasize that bronze was more than just weaponry.
Oh, much more. Bronze was political magic. In Shang China, the kings controlled the mining and casting of bronze. Yes, they made incredible weapons which allowed them to dominate their neighbors. But more importantly, they made the ritual vessels, the ding.
These are those massive three-legged cauldrons you see in museums. They're really ornate.
Exactly. They were used to offer food and wine to the ancestors. The Shang king ruled because he was the only one with the bandwidth, so to speak, to communicate with the spirits of the dead and the high god Shangdi. He was the high shaman. If the spirits were happy, the rains came and the harvests were good. If they were displeased, you got drought and famine.
So his power was based on a monopoly of access to the supernatural.
Correct. But then, the Zhou, a frontier people, conquer them around 1046 BC, and this creates a huge political and theological problem. The Shang said, "We rule because the spirits love us." Well, the Zhou just beat them up. So the Zhou needed a new story. They needed a reason why it was okay to overthrow a king.
They needed a justification for revolution.
And they came up with one of the most brilliant and enduring political concepts in human history, the mandate of heaven.
We hear this phrase a lot, but unpack it. It's not just God chose me to be king.
No, that's the divine right of kings you see in Europe, which is usually unconditional. God made me king, deal with it. The mandate of heaven is profoundly conditional. It says, heaven, the cosmic order, the universe itself, grants the right to rule to a virtuous man and his family. But
there's always a but.
But if you or your descendants lose that virtue, if you become corrupt, if you indulge yourself, if you let the dikes break, if you let the people starve, heaven will show its displeasure through natural disasters and rebellion, and it will withdraw the mandate.
And give it to someone else.
And give it to the leader of the next successful rebellion. This was genius. It legitimizes the Zhou conquest of the Shang, see?
Yeah.
Shang became corrupt, they lost the mandate, we picked it up. But it also sets a trap for every future emperor.
Because now you are responsible for everything.
Everything. An earthquake happens. That's on you, Mr. Emperor. A comet appears in the sky. That's a sign of your misrule. A plague sweeps through. Your fault. It ties the political order directly to the cosmic order. The emperor isn't just a dictator, he's the linchpin of the universe. He has to maintain harmony.
And how do you maintain harmony in a universe that's, inherently chaotic?
Through lie, through ritual.
Okay, this is a word that I think is really, really hard for modern Westerners to grasp. When we hear ritual, we think of empty ceremony, like standing up when a judge walks into a courtroom or knowing which fork to use at a fancy dinner. It's polite, but it's not real.
Right. We think of it as social icing on the cake. In this operating system, ritual is the cake. It's the flour and the eggs and the sugar. Isn't just manners, it is the grammar of social reality.
Give me a concrete example of how this works in practice.
Okay, think about a simple interaction. If I meet you for the first time and I just stare at you and refuse to shake your hand or say hello, it's rude, it's awkward. But in the Confucian worldview, if a son refuses to bow to his father in the prescribed way, he isn't just being rude, he is breaking the very connection that makes him a son and the other man a father.
He's glitching the software.
He is unraveling the fabric of reality. Confucius and his followers believe that society is made up of names and roles: father, son, ruler, subject, husband, wife. There are the 5 relationships. If everyone performs their role perfectly, if the father acts with benevolence like a father should, and the son acts with reverence like a son should, harmony emerges naturally. You don't need laws.
So morality isn't about what you feel deep inside your heart. It's about your performance. It's about your actions.
It's about orthopraxy, correct practice. In the West, we have a long tradition of being obsessed with orthodoxy, right belief. Do you truly believe in God in your heart? The Chinese system, for most of its history, asks a different question. Did you perform the sacrifice correctly? Did you wear the right color mourning clothes for your mother? Did you bow to the correct angle?
Because if you perform the moves correctly, the correct feelings will follow.
Precisely. It's the insight of the philosopher Pascal, actually. Kneel down, move your lips in prayer, and you will believe. The Chinese state bet everything on this principle. They created a society where acting your role was not a choice, but a survival imperative.
And this gets even more intense when we get to the later dynasties, right? The sources mention Neo-Confucianism in the Song dynasty around the 11th, 12th centuries.
That's when the operating system gets a major kernel update. Philosophers at that time, like Zhu Xi, started saying it wasn't enough to just bow on the outside. You had to internalize the hierarchy. You had to truly want to bow. Your inner world had to match your outer performance.
That's a huge psychological shift. It's not just behavioral control, it's thought control.
It's total. It means your internal desires, your emotions, your very sense of self must be pruned and shaped to fit the container of your social role. There's no authentic self outside of your relationships and duties.
Let's apply this directly to gender, because this is where the rules of rapport become incredibly stark.
It is the most fundamental division of all. It's framed in terms of yin and yang, outer and inner. The outer sphere, politics, business, war, scholarship, was the domain of the male, the yang. The inner sphere, the household, raising children, managing domestic affairs, was the domain of the female, the yin.
And this wasn't just, a suggestion or a cultural trend. It was a ritual barrier.
It was a metaphysical wall. To mix these spheres was to invite chaos into the family, and by extension into the state. So woman wasn't just a biological category. It was a performance of innerness, of quietness, of submission, of managing the domestic world with skill and grace. Man was a performance of outerness, of public duty and authority.
So if you are an individual who doesn't fit neatly into that box, say a woman who wants to lead or write poetry for the public, or a man who is seen as gentle or artistic in a way that's coded feminine, you are in serious trouble.
You aren't just different. You are disorderly. You are a threat to the family line, which is the cornerstone of everything.
Which leads us perfectly to the cellular unit of this whole system, the family, the lineage.
The family is the prototype for this state. This is absolutely crucial to understand. In the West, we often think of the political world as a struggle between the state and the individual.
Right, the rights of the individual versus the power of the government.
In traditional China, the state doesn't really govern individuals. It governs households.
The unit of account for taxes for law is the family.
Yes, the family organizes everything: labor, property, marriage, welfare. If you get old and sick, the state doesn't have a pension for you. Your son does. That's his duty. If you commit a crime, your whole family might be punished with you.
Collective responsibility.
Which is a double-edged sword. It buffers you against the state. Your family protects you and supports you, but it also means the family owns you. Your body isn't yours. It belongs to the lineage. You exist to produce a son to continue the line of ancestors.
And the ancestors aren't just like a memory, they're active participants.
They are active members of the household. You have to feed them, report to them, honor them. They can bless you or curse you. This creates an immense pressure to conform.
So filial piety, obedience to the father, isn't just about being a good kid, it's political training.
It is the boot camp for loyalty to the emperor. If you can't learn to follow the script at the dinner table with your father, you certainly won't be able to follow the script at the imperial court with the Son of Heaven. The inner sphere of the home is where the outer order of the empire is manufactured day by day, generation by generation.
Okay, so we have a system that demands total correct performance of your role. Now, let's see what happens when that system builds a massive bureaucracy to enforce it. Let's move to Section 3. The imperial operating system.
Here we move from the theory of ritual to the machinery of government. And the story really starts with one dynasty, the Qin.
The Qin. The ones who gave China its name. The terracotta warriors guys.
The very same. The Qin were the engineers of civilization. Before them, China was a collection of feudal states constantly fighting each other. The Qin, led by Qin Shi Huang, conquered them all and said, "No more feudalism. We are not giving land to our relatives. We are doing direct administration from the center."
This was the Qin event you mentioned earlier.
It was a complete rupture with the past. They standardized everything, weights, measures, currency. They even standardized the width of cart axles, so the ruts in the roads would be uniform across the entire empire, making logistics faster. But most importantly, they standardized the script, the writing system.
They made society legible to the state.
That's the perfect word for it. If you can count everyone, you can tax everyone, and you can conscript everyone. If everyone uses the same writing, you can send an order from the capital to the furthest frontier, and it will be understood and obeyed. They enforced this with legalism, a philosophy of harsh laws and collective responsibility. They tried to replace loyalty to the family with loyalty to the state.
But they didn't last long, did they?
Barreling 15 years. Because it was all force and no legitimacy. It was a machine without a soul. It broke the people. The Han Dynasty, which followed, figured out the magic formula, the Han synthesis. They kept the Qin machinery, the centralized bureaucracy, the commanderies, but they wrapped it in the moral language of Confucianism.
They brought back the scholars they had supposedly buried alive.
Exactly. They created the moralized bureaucracy, and this gave birth to one of the most unique classes in world history, the scholar official.
I want to spend a moment on this because it's so different from anywhere else. In Europe, the elite were the aristocrats with land or the strongest knights. Here, the elite were the nerds.
They were the intellectuals. For over 1,000 years, from the Sui dynasty onwards, the primary path to power was not through birth or wealth, but through the civil service examination, the Qichu.
Describe this exam to me, because I don't think the SATs quite covers it.
Not even close. Imagine this. From the age of 5, if your family had the resources, you started studying the Confucian classics, the 4 books, the 5 classics. Hundreds of thousands of characters. You don't just read them, you memorize them, all of them. Then you learn the vast body of commentary on them.
And then you take the test.
Then every few years, you go to a special testing center. These were vast compounds filled with thousands of tiny single-person cells. You'd bring your own food, your own ink, your own chamber pot. You would be locked in that cell for 3 days at a time.
3 days.
Sometimes longer, over multiple sessions. You sleep on a wooden board that doubles as your desk. It's hot in the summer, freezing in the winter. It smells. People went insane in those cells. People died in there. And in those conditions, you have to write these incredibly complex, perfectly structured essays, connecting the moral philosophy of the ancients to current policy problems.
Why put them through that kind of ordeal?
It wasn't just a test of knowledge, it was a test of character. It was an ideological formatting process. It proved that your mind had been so thoroughly shaped by the operating system that you could reproduce its logic under extreme pressure. If you passed, you got a government post. You became a magistrate. You got a blue robe. You got power. But you were also completely bound by the culture you had mastered.
And this created a shared elite culture across a territory the size of Europe.
Exactly. A scholar from the snowy north and a scholar from the humid south read the same books, cited the same poems, valued the same calligraphy, and most importantly, believed in the same moral hierarchy. It was the glue. It created a civilizational grammar that held the whole thing together.
And this explains the immense prestige of culture in China. Power isn't just a big sword or a pile of gold. Power is the brush. Power is the ability to write a perfect couplet, to interpret the canon correctly.
which creates a fascinating and very rigid social stratification. You had the imperial court at the top, then this class of local elites or gentry, the scholar officials and their families, then the vast mass of agrarian producers, the farmers, and then at the very bottom you had the mean people.
The mean people. That sounds incredibly harsh.
It refers to a specific legal category of social outcasts. And interestingly, for our purpose of understanding social roles and performance, this category often included people like butchers, prostitutes, and entertainers, actors.
Wait, really? But we just said that high culture, poetry, and art were the pathway to power? That feels like a contradiction.
It's a crucial paradox. The text was supreme. The poetry written by a gentleman scholar was the pinnacle of civilization. But the actor, the person who smears paint on their face and pretends to be someone else for money, they were seen as socially marginal, even degraded.
Why the distinction?
Because they were masqueraders. Think about it. In a society where acting your proper role is a sacred moral duty that holds the universe together, what is an actor? An actor is someone who plays with identity, who changes roles for entertainment, who makes a living by pretending to be what they are not. They are professionally inauthentic.
They blur the lines. They introduce ambiguity into a system that depends on clarity.
Precisely. That is a crucial tension to understand. The art form itself, like the Beijing opera, might be celebrated as a national treasure, as a vessel for history and morality. But the person inside the costume, the performer, is often considered low class, living in this precarious social space.
That perfectly mirrors the broader structure you've been describing. The system is sacred. The role is sacred. The individual human being is fuel for the machine. The actor exists to animate the archetype of the king or the concubine, not to express their own self.
You've got it. The self is supposed to be suppressed in favor of the role. The actor makes that suppression their profession, which is why they were both fascinating and suspect.
So let's pause and look at what we've built here. We have a hydraulic survival machine that demands collective labor. We have a ritual software that defines every human relationship as a hierarchy. We have a family unit that trains you from birth to obey that hierarchy. And we have an examination system that selects the most obedient, most culturally formatted minds to run the whole thing.
And this system, this entire operating system, ran with updates and patches and occasional crashes for 2,000 years.
Until the 19th century. Which brings us to Section 4, Rupture and Transformation.
The Qing Dynasty. The last empire.
Now, the story we usually hear in the West is that the late king were backward, stagnant, corrupt, just waiting to be kicked over.
And that's largely 20th century revolutionary propaganda. The Qing, especially in the 18th century, were actually a phenomenally successful high empire. They doubled the size of the territory China controlled. They were absolute masters of the traditional operating system. The problem was the system itself hit a hard limit.
The Malthusian trap? The population trap?
Exactly. Yeah. Centuries of peace and prosperity under the king led to a population explosion. It went from maybe 150 million to 300 million to over 450 million by the mid-19th century. The amount of farmable land didn't change. The administrative technology didn't change. The system was groaning under its own weight.
And then the West showed up with gunboats.
Industrial imperialism. And it wasn't just guys with better guns. It was a rival operating system. It was capitalism, science, nationalism, the concept of the nation state. And it hit the king when they were already stretched to the breaking point, rotting from the inside due to demographic pressure.
And the civilizational grammar that had held it all together just collapsed.
It shattered. Yeah. And the symbolic end came in 1905 when the King Court did something that would have been unthinkable just a generation earlier. They abolished the examination system.
Just canceled it.
Gone. After 1,300 years. Just try to imagine the impact of that. The central mechanism that had produced the elite, that defined what it meant to be a leader, that provided the entire intellectual and moral framework for governance, was just turned off.
That's like deleting the kernel of the operating system while the computer's still running.
It was exactly that. The scholar official ceased to exist as a class. The glue of society dissolved. The emperor fell a few years later in 1911. And China fell into the warlord era. Decades of fragmentation, unimaginable violence and chaos.
And a desperate, frantic search for a new mandate. If the emperor is gone and the Confucian classics are now seen as useless, what holds China together? What's the new blueprint?
This brings us to the 20th century, and the most radical, violent, and total attempt to rewrite the source code in Chinese history. Section 5. The revolutionary reordering.
Enter Mao Zedong and the Communist Party. Now, It's easy to see the communists as a total break from the past, and in many ways they were. They explicitly wanted to destroy the old society.
But if you look at the structure, they retained the deep tradition of a strong state. In fact, they supercharged it. They took that impulse for totalizing order and pushed it to its logical extreme.
How so? The old emperor seemed pretty total.
The imperial state, for all its power, largely stopped at the county level. The old saying was, "Heaven is high and the emperor is far away." The village was run by the local gentry and the family lineage. The Maoist state smashed the lineage. It penetrated right down to the neighborhood committee, to the work unit, to the dinner table.
The penetration of the private sphere.
Yes, the boundary between public and private was erased. In the old system, you had to perform the ritual correctly, but your internal thoughts were, to some degree, your own, as long as you obeyed. In the new system, specifically during the endless campaigns, you had to surrender your desire. Your mind belonged to the party.
This connects to that idea from the source of the master's discourse. The party doesn't just tell you what to do, it tells you what you should want.
You shouldn't want personal happiness or private romance or bourgeois art. You should want revolution. You should want to merge your identity with the masses, with the collective.
And this culminates in the Cultural Revolution.
The war on the past. The all-out attack on the four olds. Old customs, old culture, old habits, old ideas.
This is where the tragedy of the artist, which we touched on earlier, becomes so acute. We talked about the opera performers.
Think about what the traditional opera represented to a revolutionary. It was the old feudal hierarchy made beautiful and entertaining. It was a world of masquerade, of emperors and concubines, of scholars and maidens, of rigid, distinct roles. The revolution couldn't tolerate that ambiguity, that celebration of the old order.
Art had to serve the revolution. It had to be realism.
Socialist realism. No more masks, no more metaphors, no more ambiguity between male and female roles on stage. The art must reflect the truth of the class struggle. If you were an actor trained your entire life in the old way trained to live inside a beautiful, complex illusion, this was a death sentence for your art and your soul.
Because your role was no longer just low class, it was politically toxic.
Your role was reactionary. Your skills were a poison from the past.
You mentioned earlier the idea of sexual rapport, or the lack thereof. In the traditional society, ritual bridged the gap between men and women. You knew your role, you performed it. In the revolutionary society, what happened?
The party tried to bridge the gap with ideology. Comrade. Gender was officially flattened. Everyone is a comrade. Men and women wear the same blue suits. We are all the same under the revolution. But this repression of difference, of the messy, complex, biological and psychological reality of human feeling, it doesn't make it go away. It just creates a massive, unspoken trauma.
It's the great leap forward logic applied to the human spirit. Endure, sacrifice your individuality, and you will get a perfect, harmonious utopia.
And if you resist, you will be beaten into compliance. The old logic of the opera school was, how many beatings does it take to become a star? The new revolutionary logic was, how many struggle sessions does it take to become a good communist? It's the same structure of brutal discipline and deferred reward. You sacrifice the present for a future that never quite arrives.
And the violence against culture, the burning of the costumes, the smashing of the temples and the instruments.
It was an attempt to perform a kind of societal exorcism, to rewrite the human subject, to strip away the old person with all their attachments to family and tradition and build a new socialist person from the ground up. But you can't just delete 4,000 years of culture. It's deep in the subconscious, in the language, in the body. So it becomes a return of the repressed. The violence was the new ritual. The struggle sessions, the public humiliations. These were the new, brutal ceremonies of a society trying to birth itself through pain.
The paradox of legitimacy here is fascinating. The regime bases its right to rule on revolutionary authenticity.
Right. In the old days, you ruled because you kept order and harmony. You held the mandate. In the Maoist era, your legitimacy came from constantly breaking the old order. But how do you govern a stable state if your entire reason for being is constant disruption?
You get a cycle of chaos.
You get a cycle of chaos. Institutions begin to stabilize. The leader fears they're becoming bourgeois or bureaucratic. A new campaign is launched to smash them. Chaos ensues. It's a permanent revolution. It's utterly exhausting for the society living through it.
And eventually it exhausted the people and the party itself.
Which leads to the reform era after Mao's death. But that's a whole other deep dive. The key takeaway for our purposes here is the trauma of that transition. The social order was flipped on its head, but the intensity of the demand on the individual remained. You must submit to the group. You must perform the script. Even if the script changes from Confucian piety to class struggle, the demand for total public performance remains absolute.
So let's try to pull all this together. We've gone from the Yellow River floods to the Red Guards. What is the through line?
The through line is that Chinese civilization, at its core, is a survival mechanism, operating at a massive, unprecedented scale.
And because it's a survival mechanism, it prioritizes the group over the individual.
Always. It prioritizes hierarchy over equality. And it prioritizes stability over liberty. Because the alternative historically isn't a happy, freewheeling democracy. The alternative is chaos. It's the dikes breaking. It's the warlords returning. It's mass starvation. That's the historical memory.
And this operating system creates a specific kind of human experience, a specific set of psychological pressures.
It creates a world where relationships are paramount, but they are structured. Hierarchical relationships. It creates a culture of immense depth and resilience, capable of rebuilding itself after every apocalypse. But it also exacts a very high price from the individual.
And that price is suppression.
Suppression of the self that doesn't fit the prescribed role, whether that's the son who doesn't want to be a scholar in the Tang dynasty, the woman who wants a public life in the Qing dynasty, or the artist who wants to play a role that isn't revolutionary in the 20th century.
So connecting this back to the listener, why does understanding this operating system matter today?
Because it helps us understand that history isn't just a collection of stuff that happened a long time ago. It's the invisible architecture we're all still living inside. If you watch a film set in China, especially one that deals with art or history or the Cultural Revolution, you aren't just watching a personal drama. You are seeing the output of this operating system. You are seeing the immense grinding tension between the deep desire for order and the human cost of that order.
And it changes how we see the stories set in that world. The tragedy isn't just sad things happening to sad people.
The tragedy is structural. It's the inevitable gut-wrenching clash between human desire, which is messy, individual, specific, and often ambiguous, and a civilization built on the absolute necessity of a rigid, collective, unambiguous script.
I want to leave our listener with a final thought based on something you said. You said that in this civilization, performance, the ritual creates reality. If you act the king, you are the king. If you act the son, you are the son.
Yes, that's the fundamental principle.
So here's the provocative thought for everyone to mull over. In a world where reality is constructed by the script, what happens to the actors when the script is suddenly and violently changed overnight?
That is the nightmare of the 20th century. When the ritual becomes counter-revolutionary, when the role of the loyal son becomes the crime of the class enemy.
What happens to the actor who only knows the old lines?
They become ghosts in their own country, or they have to destroy the person they were in order to survive.
A chilling, but I think necessary perspective. We've looked at the hardware, the rivers, the land, we've looked at the software, the rituals, the laws, and we've looked at the users, the families, the artists, the people just trying to live within the code.
And that code is still running, updated, patched, with a new interface, but the kernel remains.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. It's a lot to process, but I think I'll never look at a dynasty chart the same way again.
It's always deeper than the dates on the page.
Until next time, keep exploring the source code.